You're going to be entertained. He's funny as heck. But more importantly, it's going to be life transforming, especially if you're sick, especially if you're dealing with some kind of illness, especially if a doctor has told you that you're going to be on this medication for the rest of your life and there's nothing you can do about it. When you hear Dr. Wallach speak, you're going to say, like I said when I first heard him speak, it's obvious. So would you please join me in welcoming a good friend, a colleague, truly an inspiration, my nutritional mentor, and somebody who's just a great honor and a privilege to say that he's my friend, Dr. Joel Wallach.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, and thank each and every one of you for being here on a Friday evening. You could be out partying. Appreciate you being here. And for those of you who don't know me, just very quickly, the thing that makes my view different is that I have a degree in agriculture. And in agriculture, we don't have health insurance for animals. And we need to maximize our income from raising animals. And so we had to learn how to maximize their lifespan, maximize their production of meat and milk and eggs from the same amount of feed. We had to have perfect pregnancies, no early births where they needed 3 months in the incubator. We had to have no birth defects. And the animals who were born on the farm had to reach either reproductive age or market weight without need for health care. We did that with vitamins and minerals. Went on to veterinary school, became a veterinarian. Halfway through veterinary school, I graduated ag school, so I was a graduate student, began to take pathology courses, wrote the first paper on a mass die-off in America from pollution. I'm sure it happened many times before, but nobody recognized it. Got it published, and that kind of redirected my whole life. Graduated veterinary school, taught pathology up at Iowa State University for a year, and then got invited by Marlon Perkins from the old Mutual Omaha Wild Kingdom show, and I'd worked for him through high school, to go to Africa and work on the White Rhino Conservation Project and the Elephant Conservation Project. Caught 200 white rhinos, shipped them back to the States, and if you go and you see a white rhino in a wild animal park or a zoo, it's probably one that I caught, or maybe even offsprings of the ones that I caught. After 2 years of working on those projects, Perkins sent me a letter, said, look, I've got a big grant from the National Institutes of Health. We need to study the causes of death in zoo animals and the people who live in close proximity to the zoo animals because they have the same air, the same water, the same food sources. We want to find out if pollution or nutrition have something to do with their causes of death. Came back, worked on that project for 10 years, and the short version is I did over 20,000 autopsies and 10 million chemistries on 17,000 some change of over 454 species of zoo animals and 3,000 humans. And the bottom line of the study was that every animal, every human being who dies of what we would call natural causes, not trauma, but natural causes, died of a nutritional deficiency disease and not pollution. Now, the book that came out of that, 1,200 pages, in the Smithsonian Institute is a national treasure, and I'm just a young kid, and I was really very proud of that. And they moved me around from zoo to zoo, university to university, so I could deal with more species of animals and different people eating different things from all over the place. And again, to make a long story short, in 1977, I was working at Emory University in the Yerkes Primate Center in Atlanta, Georgia, and discovered the first documented case of a non-human with cystic fibrosis. I'm sure people had seen it before, but they didn't recognize it. But because of my vast experience when it came to autopsies, I recognized this immediately as cystic fibrosis, got it confirmed by the experts. And then when I told them it wasn't genetically transmitted, that I could create as many baby monkeys as they wanted with cystic fibrosis because it was a deficiency of a single mineral selenium during pregnancy or shortly after pregnancy, and I could produce as many monkeys as they wanted, they fired me. They said, Wallach, you must be sniffing glue. Everybody knows that cystic fibrosis is genetically transmitted, and there's no way it could be something you could prevent, reverse, and create. And so, to make a long story short, again, went back to school, became a naturopathic physician, began treating humans in 1978, and been doing it ever since. It's 36 years. I've been treating humans with nutrition and doing the thing with nutrition as we did in animals. So what you're going to get is a view from agriculture, veterinary medicine, as a comparative pathologist, and as a primary care physician. So you're going to get 4 different views of the same subject. So bear with me and hold your questions till later. Now, in the beginning, doctors thought that all diseases were caused by evil spirits or little gods sitting on planets. And if you burned enough goats to the evil spirits, they would spare you of disease. And if you burn enough goats to the good spirits, they would protect you. And then formal religions came along, and formal religions and science conflicted with each other. One of my favorite stories, of course, is Galileo, and he wasn't the only one, but he was one of the more vocal ones, and he wrote scientific papers on the fact that the Earth and the other planets circled around the sun. Prior to that, the churches all believed that the sun rotated around the Earth, and the Inquisition Committee from the Catholic Church at the time condemned Galileo to death for being sacrilegious and going against the church's teachings and belief. And fortunately for him, there was a cardinal when he was a young man, became pope at the time and was able to commute his death sentence from being burned at the stake to house arrest for the rest of his life. And so that's kind of how there was a conflict between churches and science at that time. Several thousand years ago, physicians and philosophers believed that there was a cure-all. We only had to look for it. There'd be one treatment that would cure everything. It was called the panacea. That's where the word panacea came from. And if you could learn how to transmute lead into gold, you were smart enough to figure out that one cure for everything. It was called alchemy, sorcerer. And even Disney came out with a movie, The Sorcerer. After a while, the doctors just got into trying to turn lead into gold for the gold, not for the panacea. Now, Louis Pasteur came along in the 1800s, and he came up with a germ theory. He was a microbiologist, and he was a chemist for the wine industry. To prevent wine from becoming vinegar, he came up with the idea of heating it to knock down the population of yeast and bacteria to stop the fermentation process, the same way with milk, and it was named pasteurization after himself. Now, again, he came up with a germ theory, and in the germ theory, he said there are certain bacteria, because they had just had a microscope invented by a Dutch eyeglasses maker, von Leeuwenhoek, and he could actually see bacteria, and he could grow bacteria from people who had pneumonia and meningitis and many other diseases, and then he could take those bacteria and inject it back into other people and to animals and get the same disease. And doctors fought him over that, tooth and nail. They would fight him over that. And so he had to set up an experiment right in the center of Paris. He got two groups of 25 sheep each group, and he gave one group a vaccination, which he created against anthrax, which is a disease that killed people and animals, and the other group got a dummy vaccination. It was just water being injected instead of the vaccination. Both groups he injected with heavy doses of the bacteria that caused anthrax, Bacillus anthracis, and in the group that was vaccinated, only 1 out of the 25 died. In the group that was not vaccinated, all 25 died. And the reporters were there, thousands of people were watching this as it went along, and so he became very famous over the anthrax thing. He was also the guy, even though he didn't know the term viruses, he was the one to first come up with a post-exposure vaccine for rabies as a virus thing, and he figured out how to do that. Very, very smart guy. It took a long time for doctors to agree that, yes, there were germs. And once they figured out where there was germs, they said, everything is caused by germs, even cancer and insanity and so forth. And a guy by the name of Koch came along and said, no, you have to isolate the bug, make sure that it's the bug, inject it back into a susceptible host, cause the disease again, isolate it again, get the same bug, then you know it caused the disease. The guy's name was Koch, K-O-C-H. About the same time, there was a priest in Austria by the name of Gregor Mendel. And he was a very smart guy, and he had taken many courses in what we would call today calculus, and he could predict numbers and things. And because he was very smart and a detailed kind of guy, the cardinal in the parish that he was the priest in put him in charge of creating peas for priests to eat during the wintertime. And he had hothouses where they grow these peas during the wintertime. And there were peas with red flowers, there were peas with white flowers. And every once in a while, there'd be one volunteer, a dozen of them volunteer on the path between the two different hothouses. And these are ones that weren't planted. They would just pop up, and they had pink flowers, and he reasoned that they were a mix or a hybrid between the red flower and the white flower pea plants, and he could do experiments with crossbreeding and so forth, and he came up with hybrids, he came up with dominants and recessives, and so he's kind of the father of genetics, but he never related the genetic concept to diseases, just life itself. At the same time, Charles Darwin came along, and Charles Darwin did not know about Gregor Mendel, but Gregor Mendel did know about Darwin. Darwin was the son of a very wealthy Englishman. They were landed. They had 10,000-acre estates, and his mother was very wealthy. She was from the Wedgwood family, the English dishware company, and very interesting stuff. And he collected bugs and feathers and eggshells, and he would shoot birds and little animals and make collections. And when he was 22 years old, he wrote a paper for the newspaper of the Royal Society. It was very prestigious for anybody, let alone a 22-year-old guy, to write the paper. And he wrote the paper on invertebrates. Little polyps would make sponges and reefs. And he was hired by the British Navy when he was 22 years old to go around the Earth in the HMS Beagle, a British warship, and build artificial reefs. And he was so successful at this, they hired him for another 3 years. So for a total of 5 years, Darwin was going to places that nobody else had ever been before and building these reefs. But he was also collecting animals that nobody had seen before. And he recognized immediately, well, not immediately, he recognized in 5 years when he wrote his book on the origin of species that parents of the babies were passing on information. Human beings had babies who were human beings. Dogs had babies who were dogs, puppies. Cattle had babies who were calves. Oak trees had babies that were oak trees. And he'd find these weird animals, and he would shoot them and bring them back and taxidermy them, because nobody would believe there were such things as penguins living in the Antarctic and so forth. So this is what he did, and his book was on the origin of species. And Darwin never said that man came from apes, but he said all things, all living things, whether you're a tree or a tulip or a oak tree or a human being or a hummingbird, passed on information to the young. Well, to sell newspapers, the reporters said that he said that men came from apes, and that wasn't what he said. He said all things pass on information, is all he said. Now, his cousin, Francis Galton, whose mother was Darwin's mother's sister, also from the Wedgwood family. Francis Galton was also from a very wealthy landed family, and he was in university, and his roommate was a guy by the name of Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of Sherlock Holmes. And Francis Galton was the model that became Sherlock Holmes in the book, in the series Sherlock Holmes. In the day, people were just learning about fingerprints, and part of the parlor tricks they would do when you'd come to a party were to give you a piece of white paper, put your fingers on some ink, and everybody would make several pages with their fingerprints, and they would exchange fingerprints. And he recognized, by looking at these very carefully with a magnifying glass, that fingerprints were different from person to person. And Francis Galton came up with the idea to use fingerprints to track criminals. Very smart guy, and that's why he was the model for Sherlock Holmes. He also said, we can speed up human evolution like we do in animals by selective breeding, just like we do in animals. That's why they have livestock shows and dog shows and horse shows. They want to get the very best phenotype or the very best physical example of male horses and female horses, and when the foal is born, it's going to be perfect. Same with dogs, and same with geese and chickens and whatever you might be breeding. He said, we can do the same thing with human beings. And he was very benevolent, and he went out and he started a dating club, and he'd hand out invitations to people he considered to be perfect examples of perfect humanity, included IQ and intelligence and speed and athletes and strength. And both the men and women had to be 6 foot tall, blonde-haired and blue-eyed, which he called the master race. Now, this was in the 1800s. Begin to sound familiar. He would give out invitations, and he would have these tall, young, blonde-haired and blue-eyed women meet with tall, blonde, blue-eyed men at these banquets. And just by socializing, he figured some of them would fall in love with another one, and they would get married and have more babies like them. Well, after the First World War, the League of Nations broke up Germany. Germany originally went all the way from Russia all the way to Spain. It was the biggest nation in Europe. They broke them up into the provinces, became individual countries: Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Holland, and so forth, Poland. After the Second World War, there was the Nuremberg trials. And the Nuremberg trials was to find out who were the most horrible of the war criminals. They murdered 60 million people. They experimented on them, did horrific stuff, and they certainly didn't try any German generals for war crimes because they were just good soldiers. They didn't put any bureaucrats on trial for war crimes because they were just pushing paper and never made any decisions or shot or killed anybody or butchered anybody or experimented on anybody. And so most of the people who were executed for war crimes were medical doctors. The example was Joseph Mengele. He was called the angel of death because, particularly of twins, he would kill one and do experiments on the other one based on what he found in the other one. He would kill people with birth defects, cleft palate, belly button hernias, people who had Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, older people who were infirm. They would just kill them because they were useless. They were, in his terms, useless eaters. They just took the assets of Germany and didn't do anything productive. Even if you were Jewish, who they wanted to eliminate, if you were physically able to work, they would put you to work until you couldn't work anymore. They wouldn't feed you because that was a waste of food. So when you worked yourself almost to death, they would gas you. Now, everybody knows people who were found guilty of war crimes were hung. And of course, most of the people who were hung for war crimes were medical doctors at the end of the war. Now, there's some medical doctors who did horrific crimes, and they weren't executed. And that's because they had all this data from the murder and experimentation on 60 million people. And they would call in to generals and say, look, I've got all this information here from all the experiments we've done over the last 5 years, and I can give them to you in exchange for a pardon. If you don't pardon me, I'll just burn them, and you'll never get all the information that we collected. And many of these Nazi doctors were pardoned because they turned over the information to U.S. forces, and they were made professors in U.S. medical schools. All this information is a book that's out now, not mine, somebody else's book. It's called Operation Paperclip. Everybody knows about Werner von Braun, the rocket scientist we took from the Nazis, but we also got the doctors. Also, all the pharmaceutical companies we have now, Bayer, Pfizer, Roche, Eli Lilly, were Nazi pharmaceutical companies, which they made their money to run the war. We took them over for reparations. This is how we got paid for the cost of the war, was pharmaceutical companies. And they turned them into publicly traded companies. And, of course, originally the government owned all the stock. They sold it to the general public, and that's how the government got paid for running the war. Now, our doctors weren't innocent. Our doctors did the same thing here in America. They did experiments on people. One of the more famous ones, not the only one, but one of the more famous ones was the Tuskegee experiment on 400 black men in America who had syphilis, and they said, look, we're going to give you this new penicillin. But they only gave them injections of water because they wanted to see if these guys would die from the same terrible symptoms that white guys died from. Published many scientific papers on the subject. In Canada, they did the same thing. They had what they called residence schools, and they would go into the Indian reservations in Canada and actually kidnap the kids from there, saying, look, we're going to give them a better education, we're going to feed them better, they're struggling here on the reservations. And nobody wanted to believe what was going on in there, but they were experimenting on these kids. They give them tuberculosis, and they tried different drugs to see which one would save them and which ones failed. And this came out, this is March of this year, because they found 50,000 bodies of kids under the age of 10 in Canada that had been killed during this program. 50,000 in Canada were killed in the same type of experiments that were done in Germany. When did this all translate into us being the sickest country in the world? 1901 it began. It actually began in 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Monday, September 4th, 1882. We'll get to that in a minute. But in 1901, something very dramatic happened. A product was invented to be a machinery lubricant called Crisco. See, Procter & Gamble didn't invent Crisco. They did not invent hydrogenated oils. The process of fat hardening was invented in 1901 by Wilhelm Norman, another German chemist, working on a machine oil factory, trying to find a cheap replacement for machine oil, which is made from suet, which is beef fat, and they couldn't get it. Well, he came up with using cottonseed oil and our corn oil that had a copper cofactor, and then they'd bubble hydrogen through it and boil it and all this kind of stuff, and they would get Crisco. And Procter & Gamble recognized they could make a lot more money selling it as food than they did as a machinery lubricant. But they couldn't go against the butter and the cream and the lard that people have been using for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, so how did they do that? They hired a guy by the name of Ansel Keys. And Ansel Keys had gotten a degree in anthropology and a medical degree from the University of Minnesota. And Ansel Keys was one of the founders of the American Heart Association. Deaths from coronary heart disease was rare until 1925, after they started selling Crisco to everybody. Ansel Keys, they raised $1.7 million, which made the American Heart Association one of the more wealthy of the medical associations in America. And they went crazy changing everybody's ideas about eating meat and cholesterol and so forth because they wanted to sell more Crisco, which made the American Heart Association richer. Now, at the same time, all the experiments were being done was they showed very clearly that the people who had the higher blood cholesterols were the ones who lived longer, had less heart disease, and had no Alzheimer's disease. The lower you got your cholesterol, the more heart disease, the more Alzheimer's disease, and the younger you died. So it boils down to personal ambition, bad science, politics, and bias derailed nutrition policy over the past half century and caused America to be the sickest country. Because the American Heart Association wanted the money, they would buy great ads like this. They made them almost Norman Rockwell pictures, made to help take the fat worry out of good eating. Bam! You're dead. Ansel Keys was so famous, he actually got his picture on the cover of Time magazine. And this was in 1961. Dr. Ansel Keys, father of the low saturated fat and high oil diet, and drove Crisco as a replacement for butter and lard. He's the one who killed America. Time magazine, December 2008. The sorry state of American health. You have to appreciate, we spend more money for health care than all of the 204 nations of the world combined. We spend more money each year than 204 nations. We rank 92nd in healthfulness. There's 91 other nations whose peoples are healthier than us. We rank 60th in longevity. There's 59 other nations whose peoples live longer than us. And God forgive us, we rank 41st in live births and first month survivability of our babies. In this article, they say our children will be the first generation who do not live as long as their parents because of Ansel Keys. Harvard Medical School says 52% of medical doctors in America are on street drugs or prescription drugs or alcohol during the working day. This came out 4/16/14. Sometimes I'd go into the bathroom in the middle of a long surgery to take medication intravenously. Another doctor says I was absolutely impaired using narcotics while working as a doctor, and no one ever tripped onto it or noticed. AARP Monthly Bulletin, American Association of Retired People Monthly Bulletin, March 2012, the worst place to be in America when you're sick is an American hospital. And I took some of these out of the article so you could see what they're talking about. It says the number of American patients who die each year from American hospital errors is equal to 4 jumbo jets crashing each week. That's 1,500 people a week, 3,000 every 2 weeks, 6,000 a month, 72,000 a year. How many would fly commercial airlines if you knew that they killed 72,000 passengers every year? How many would go to and frequent a particular type of fast food franchise if you knew that they killed 72,000 of their patrons every year? Of course, there's a big controversy right now. VA hospital in Arizona was trying to stay in budget, and so they side-railed hundreds of patients for a month so they wouldn't break the budget before the end of their fiscal year, and these 40 of them died. Well, that's nothing new. This came out in 1999. It was a big study by the Department of Veterans Affairs. They said there's hundreds of thousands of minor mistakes in the VA system every year in America, 3,000 which are so severe that the veteran has to stay there for the rest of their life in the VA hospital. Of these 3,000 serious mistakes, I want you to look at the word that the Department of Veterans Affairs used. They said medical doctors in VA hospitals kill 700 veterans each year. Last year in Afghanistan, the enemy killed 375 active military personnel. You're safer on a field of battle than you are in a VA hospital. God forgive us. According to the Wall Street Journal, looking at December 2012, each surgeon in America makes thousands of errors each year. 52% are gorked out on drugs and alcohol, street drugs, prescription drugs, and alcohol. Here's one of my favorite examples. This girl here, a young lady, 28 years old, went into a general hospital in Orlando, Florida to have her first baby. The OBGYN, who was intoxicated, cut her arms off at the elbows, cut her legs off at the groin. He never had his license suspended for 3 seconds. He went out and had martinis that afternoon. She's never gotten anything for it. Somebody needs to go to jail here. This is one of my favorites because it shows you very clearly where they got the information. This was the USA Today in February 2007. Look at the title. It's self-explanatory. Patient, Protect Thyself. And the data came from the Institute of Medicine, which is kind of an ethical watchdog for the medical profession. And then the Journal of the American Medical Association, the most prestigious medical journal in America, certainly, maybe the world. And then the Centers for Disease Control, which is the watchdog for the federal government. It's in Atlanta, Georgia. And their combined data, this is a yearly figure, said each year in America, medical doctors kill, injure, and infect 15 million of their patients in their workplace. Each year in America, medical doctors kill, injure, and infect 15 million of their patients in their hospitals and clinics. How many would fly commercial airlines if you knew they killed, injured, and infected 15 million passengers every year? Nobody would fly. Yet you still go to doctors. I find that amazing, how much control the doctors have over you. Everybody knows about Bernie Madoff. He went to jail for life for defrauding his investors of $3 billion. Well, this came out in September of 2012. Front page article in many newspapers around America. Now, this is not government. The title, U.S. healthcare wastes $750 billion. You kind of get the sense that this is government making the waste. No. When you read the article, it says your doctor, not the government, your doctor, out of every dollar that he bills you and your insurance company, 30 cents of it is a fraudulent billing. 30 cents of it is either for procedures he's billing for that he didn't do, but he needed the money for his kids to go to Harvard and all that kind of stuff for their tuition, and his wife wanted a Mercedes convertible. And so he just took your ID number for your insurance company, billed him. Or he did something for you that you really didn't need, and he billed for that. 30 cents out of every dollar. It amounts to $750 billion a year. That's $750 billion each year, 1/3 of the American medical budget. And not a single doctor gets his license suspended for 3 seconds. Not a single doctor had his license revoked. Nobody goes to jail. Nobody gets the equivalent fine as a parking ticket. Bernie Madoff went to life for $3 billion. Doctors get a walk for $750 billion. Start breaking that down a little bit. The Center for Disease Control, again, the federal agency in Atlanta, Georgia, that tracks this stuff. Just in hospitals alone each year, not private offices and clinics, just in hospitals alone, medical doctors infect 2 million patients because they don't wash their hands after they go potty. And of those 2 million infections, 90,000 die. What would happen if Iran or North Korea were to send over intercontinental ballistic missiles with biological weapons, infect 2 million people in our large population centers? Miami, Atlanta, New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, places like Cincinnati, Ohio, Chicago, Dallas, Texas, LA, and kill 90,000. This is a yearly figure. This isn't one time. This goes on and on and on, year after year after year, and nobody seems to care. But we'd go to war with Iran. We'd vaporize them with an atomic weapon if they'd do that to one of our cities. But the medical doctors have legislated themselves into being a protected monopoly, self-policing. They've also legislated all of their competition into being fifth-class citizens, quacks who cannot be paid by insurance. When you get a roof on your house or put an irrigation system in your house, you're going to get 3, 4, 5 bids or more. After you choose what you think is the best one based on what they're telling you and the contract they propose for you, you're still going to, before you sign the contract, you're going to go to the Better Business Bureau and see if there's any complaints about these companies you're looking at. You go to the same doctor year after year after year after year for 20, 30 years. Whatever he says you do, you don't even question it. You don't even go get a second opinion. And that's what's killing America. One bacteria, C. diff, Clostridium difficile, a human poop bacteria, kills 30,000 each year in hospitals alone. That's 1/3 of those 90,000 that are killed by infections are killed by C. diff, only found in human poop. Doctors give it to people because they don't wash their hands after they go potty. Well, in 1993, there were 85,700 of these infections in American hospitals. 17 years later, 2010, it went up 400% to almost 350,000 from 85,000. And so, does this give you a sense that doctors are really working hard to solve the problem? No. There's no consequences why it looks like that. If we were to take the top 50 doctors who kill 1,000 people a week and hang them, and then take the next 1,000 doctors who kill 25 a week and put them in jail for life, the table would look like that, wouldn't it? Because there's consequences. The reason why the table looks like this is there's no consequences. Now, the Chinese have figured out how to deal with this. There's two types of Chinese doctors. The traditional Chinese medical doctors are called the barefoot doctors. They go back 1,000 years before Egyptian doctors. Egyptian doctors came online about 4,000 years ago. The traditional Chinese medical doctors came on 1,000 years before that. Acupuncture, herbs, great writings, and so forth. The Yellow Emperor recorded all this stuff. I mean, this goes way, way back, thousands of years. And during the Second World War, the Japanese soldiers were moving ahead of their supply line. They were starving, and they were poor, and they would strip, like locusts, they would strip the civilian population of everything. And the doctors had the best shoes, so they always wanted to get the doctor's shoes. So the traditional Chinese medical doctors were called the barefoot doctors. They would go out to the villages and help people with acupuncture and herbs, and they were beloved by the people of the villages. Well, after the Second World War, the Chinese sent their very brightest young medical students to the United States and Canada and Europe for Western medical training, and they came back and began to kill the Chinese patients just like Western medical doctors do here in North America and Europe. Well, the Chinese have figured out how to solve the problem. Each year, grieving families kill 27.3 doctors in each hospital, on the average, who kill their relatives, and this is considered justifiable homicide. So the government's now trying to say, okay, come on, guys, let's cool our jets. Let's not do this anymore. We know it's listed as justifiable homicide. That when, a doctor kills your father, the brothers and the sons go and kill the doctor with axes and hammers and all this kind of, because they're not allowed to have guns, so they have to do it with primitive weapons. And I'm not proposing that we kill doctors, but what I am proposing is we take care of ourselves enough where we don't need them. If you don't need them, they'll pack up and leave. Couple more, and then we'll get into the diseases. Deaths by medication error rising. This came out in 2006. This is a national story in the United States. Medication errors, these types of mistakes are tied to 1.5 million fatalities and permanent injuries each year in America alone. And everybody wants to take medication. I find that amazing. A federal jury in Lafayette, Louisiana, lodged a punitive damage against Eli Lilly and their Japanese partners for $9 billion over hiding lactose risks. Now, what is that? Lactose, of course, is an extremely well-respected drug that's used for diabetes. I mean, it will lower your blood sugar. But everybody who takes lactose gets cancer. They forgot to tell you that part. They conspired to keep that piece secret. And so a federal jury dinged them $9 billion. I thought that was cool. The problem is, that's chump change for them. That's like charging you a nickel for a parking ticket. None of the guys who were in on the conspiracy lost their jobs. None of them got a fine. A parking ticket, they got nothing. The company got dinged $9 billion, but again, it's like you being charged a nickel. Hospital care fatal for some patients. This study was actually done by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General, which is essentially the auditor for Medicare. What they did was look at the monthly kill rate by medical doctors on seniors, people who were on Medicare. This is a monthly figure. Medical doctors kill 15,000 Medicare patients in hospitals with minor medical procedures and screening tests. Now, how many over age 65 would fly commercial airlines if you knew that they killed 15,000 seniors every month? That's 180,000 a year. Nobody would fly if you're over age 65. But you still go to doctors. Why? Because of insurance. I'll show you 3 people, very famous people that they killed in the last couple of years who were over age 65. Andy Rooney from 60 Minutes was 92 years old. He and his 87-year-old wife were going to go on a world cruise for a year, and she was nervous. Said, Andy, I'm 87, you're 92. One of us is going to get sick here, and we need to take a disc with our medical records in case, because we don't even speak the languages of the place we're going. So he agrees. They go into the doctor, and while the discs are being burned on the records, his doctor is going through his papers and saying, Andy, you're 92 years old. I can't see where you've ever had a colonoscopic exam. You could have cancer lurking around in you. And he should have said, no, I don't have any blood in my stool. I'm not losing weight. I don't have any pelvic pain. I haven't had any change in my bowel habits, and so I'm not going to get a colonoscopic exam. But instead he said, oh, okay. Andy Rooney, the skeptical guy, was a compliant 90-year-old guy. Goes in the next day, the doctor sticks a garden hose up his rump, punctures his intestine. 3 days later, he's dead from peritonitis belly infection. When you look online, Andy Rooney obituary, no matter what service you're looking at, they all say the same thing. It was a news release, from 60 Minutes. They said, Mr. Rooney died from complications of a minor medical procedure. Wasn't minor for him, it killed him. And then Dick Clark, American Bandstand, 80 years old, goes in for a physical, complains to his doctor. He gets up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. The doctor says, you probably have an enlarged prostate. Sends him to urologist exams. Says, yeah, you got an enlarged prostate, Dick. We need to cut part of your prostate gland out. We're going to put you on prescriptions. And I could see Dick Clark kind of arguing a little bit. He said, well, I don't think I need surgery. Well, yes, you do. Listen, Dick, this is a minor procedure. You don't have to stay in the hospital overnight. It's an outpatient procedure. It's like clipping your fingernails, for goodness sakes. You come in at 9 o'clock, 9:30 you're done. 1 o'clock you're on the golf course, for goodness sakes. Don't be a wimp. And he should have said no, but he said, oh, okay. Goes in at 9 o'clock, 9:30 he's dead. What the doctor forgot to tell him was when you cut on the prostate gland, it releases a hormone that causes your risk of thrombotic stroke, coronary thrombosis, pulmonary embolism to go up. Well, he won the lottery. He got all 3 and died. Went at 9 o'clock, 9:30 he was dead. But my favorite is Neil Armstrong, our top astronaut, first man to walk on the moon, personally saved 2 doomed NASA missions. 82 years old, went in for his physical. The doctors came out saying, that NASA program must be wonderful. Neil, you're 82 years old, but you got the blood work and the physical body of a 50-year-old guy. The only thing we can find is one coronary artery way down at the tip, has a 3-millimeter wide, 30% blockage. You're not going to have any chest pain, angina, because it's too low. It had to be high up in the artery to have the pain. There's really no risk of having a heart attack because it's too low. It has to be high up in the artery to have risk for heart attack. But it could be a progressive thing. And if you let us, we'd recommend doing putting in a stent, R2, and doing a bypass, R2. You'll never have to worry about a heart attack from these arteries. And he should have said no, 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 but instead he said, oh, yes, sir, let's do it. 3 days later, he was dead. What did he die from? Complications of an elective cardiovascular procedure. Elective means he really didn't need it. All the doctors went out and had martinis, saying, gee, we killed Neil Armstrong. Can you believe that? Now, if Al-Qaeda would have kidnapped him, cut his head off on YouTube, we'd have sent in drones to blow up baby food factories in case they had biological weapons in there. We'd certainly send in SEAL Team 6 to kill a bunch of people. But let a doctor kill our top astronaut, it's okay. To me, this is the most important part of life. The first 91 days of pregnancy, the baby's going down an assembly line. And like a factory, say making cars, TVs, refrigerators, tractors, furnaces, whatever it's making, there has to be stations where it has all the parts, and you got a team of guys installing these parts. They're handing them to them. The one guy's putting the parts in, then it goes on to the next station, they put in the parts, and it goes to the next station. If somebody has to run to the bathroom, there's nobody there to kind of keep up with it, nobody stops the assembly line, that furnace or that car will get to the line, there'll be pieces missing. The same thing happens with babies. There's pieces missing. This is what causes birth defects, because the mother was missing something. Well, whose fault is that? It's the OBGYN. The OBGYN is responsible for every birth defect you can name. There's not a single birth defect that's caused genetically. It's all caused by nutritional deficiencies of the embryo. The last 6 months of pregnancy is just growth. By the time 91 days goes by, you've got what you got, and then the next 6 months are just growth. Anybody here ever hear of things that are called inborn errors of metabolism? Anybody ever hear inborn errors of metabolism? Okay, inborn errors of metabolism are things that are missing during the formation of the embryo in the early stages, in the first couple of weeks of the embryo's life, and the baby comes out with stuff that doesn't happen properly. For instance, how many of you have heard of lactose intolerance? You drink milk, eat cheese, eat ice cream, you get bubbly intestines, and it's painful and bloating and diarrhea. It's called lactose intolerance because you're missing the enzyme lactase, because mama was missing something when that enzyme was being formed. You can make up the difference by supplementing with lactase, and you can take the enzyme and then go knock yourself out, eat all the ice cream and cheese you want, and no problem. Same thing is true with fructose intolerance. Same thing, similar is true to PKU, phenylketonuria, where mama left out the piece that's required to properly break down an amino acid called phenylalanine. If you don't properly break down phenylalanine, the metabolic pieces that are left over that aren't broken down will cause retardation. Now, what you have to do here for this is to avoid it. And so by law, any food product or anything you're going to eat or put in your mouth that has phenylalanine, they have to say, warning, PKU patients, this product contains phenylalanine. Do not take it if you're a PKU patient. So by avoidance, you can prevent the disease. Same thing is true with type 1 diabetes. It's an inborn error of metabolism. It's not a genetic thing. Mama was missing something. When the cells that form insulin, the beta cells, they were never formed. And so the baby is going to be on insulin for the rest of its life. It's an inborn error of metabolism. We have type 1 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is a simple mineral deficiency. It's easily reversed. Now, in black people, they have a disease called sickle cell anemia. The same disease in white people is called thalassemia. This is where the mother is having the baby go down the assembly line, and when the bone marrow is being formed, the part that makes the hemoglobin, there's something missing, and the hemoglobin has what's called the sickle cell trait, or the thalassemia trait. You're missing nutrients. Instead of being like this normal red blood cell over here, look like a little donut, they will sickle and look like grains of wheat, maybe even look like a sickle. And so you can see where these would clog up little arteries and cause strokes and swelling and all kinds of other complications. And so by supplementing with the 90 essential nutrients, which we'll get into in a minute, and taking some extra selenium and some extra B6, you can prevent people who have that sickle cell trait from sickling. Been doing this since 1991 in people in Atlanta, Georgia, in the Georgia Sickle Cell Foundation. You all heard of Down syndrome. Down syndrome is not genetically transmitted. Down syndrome is actually caused by a zinc deficiency in the first 10 minutes of pregnancy. I've actually reversed them. Not after the baby's born, not after 91 days, but Lauren Knievel, Evel Knievel's niece-in-law, called me about 12 years ago, and she said, look, Doc, I've got a pregnancy. It's 2.5 months along. By 2 different tests from 2 different laboratories, they tell me I have a baby with Down syndrome. I don't want to have an abortion, and they tell me you might be able to help me. I said, well, we've done it in animals. We've never done it in humans. And she said, well, I'm not going to get an abortion, so, this is not going to be a problem. Just let's do it. And so what I did was give her the 90 essential nutrients and give her some extra zinc, and the baby was born perfectly normal later on. Done it several times since. Okay, early on in pregnancy with a Down syndrome baby, apparently they are reversible. But once the baby's 91 days, you can't. You've all heard of spina bifida. One of the lawsuits I lodged against the FDA was over folic acid supplementation and prenatal vitamins. Until we sued them, there was no law requiring folic acid and prenatal vitamins, and babies would be born with spina bifida. This baby also has a zinc deficiency because he's got club feet. This baby has a gluten intolerance because he's born with no hair. All this is avoidable by perfect nutrition and corrective diets before conception. Whose fault is this? The OBGYN. I told you, I discovered the first non-human case of cystic fibrosis in a rhesus monkey at Yerkes Primate Center in Atlanta, Georgia, Emory University. And of course, they fired me for saying it wasn't genetic. And about 5 years ago, we began to send Jerry Lewis papers and records of kids whose muscular dystrophy had been reversed. We had learned the cause, prevention, and cure of muscular dystrophy in animals in 1957, and over the years I had used it. Every once in a while I'd see a muscular dystrophy kid and we were able to reverse it, and I'd see another one 3 or 4 years later and we'd be able to reverse it, but it wasn't big enough numbers to make any impact on science. Well, about 5 years ago, one of our associates, Marvin Ropp, who was a Navy SEAL, but he started out as an Amish kid. When he reached 18, he shaved his beard off, gave his team of horses to his brother, joined the Navy and became a Navy SEAL, very highly decorated. He came back and he was just really offended because the medical doctors were using the Amish as an ATM machine, telling him all their diseases were genetic and there's nothing to do about it, and they were just ripping these poor people off. So we gave Jerry Lewis all the paperwork, and so Jerry Lewis got excited. He said, Jerry, we don't want any money. We've already spent the time and money and effort. We now know what we believe is the cause, prevention, and cure of muscular dystrophy. Do you want to be the one? These are Jerry's kids. You want to be the one to make the announcements? He got excited. He took all this data to the medical committee of Muscular Dystrophy Foundation, and they fired Jerry Lewis 4 years ago. That's why he's not doing the telethon anymore. They fired Jerry Lewis. He's not sick. He's not dead. He's doing shows in Vegas every night. They fired Jerry Lewis. Somebody needs to go to jail. Well, in 1989, with Ma Lan, I went to China and went to Qishan province, China. Why did I go there? Because everybody knows the Qishan disease, which occurs in 13 out of every 1,000 kids there, is a cardiomyopathy heart disease. So sudden heart death is caused by deficiency of selenium. We know a deficiency of selenium is the cause of cystic fibrosis and the cause of muscular dystrophy. And I reasoned that if this is true, and everybody, including the World Health Organization, agreed that Keyshawn disease is cardiomyopathy heart disease is caused by a selenium deficiency, there had to be some kids there in China with cystic fibrosis and muscular dystrophy. And experts, when I asked them about it, they said, no, come on, Wallach. Cystic fibrosis and muscular dystrophy only occur in white kids from Eastern European origin. Well, I knew that wasn't true because I had autopsied black kids and Oriental kids, Asian kids that had these diseases, cystic fibrosis and muscular dystrophy, so I knew that couldn't be true. So we went there. Passed all the tests, did everything we needed to do to satisfy the Chinese government that we knew what we were doing. They were going to get their credit for it, and did 1,700 autopsies in kids under the age of 10. 595 of them, exactly 35%, had cystic fibrosis and 100% had muscular dystrophy. Published it in English. Published it in the Journal of Trace Element Research. Very well-respected scientific journal in the United States. The equivalent journals in Chinese in China. Sent copies to the Muscular Dystrophy Foundation, to the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, never heard a word from them. Somebody needs to go to jail. You all have heard of cerebral palsy. Cerebral palsy is one of these gradient diseases. It's a gradient disease, different degrees of severity. Baby's born with 10% of its cerebellum, which is the part of the brain that's damaged when you have cerebral palsy. 10% damage, 10% underdevelopment. The baby's going to kind of walk like Charlie Chaplin, and with braces and some physical therapy, they can kind of circumvent that disability. If they have a 25% underdevelopment of their cerebellum, they kind of flop around a little bit and with their arms and hands and upper body as well as their legs, and they have cerebral palsy. If they have 50% development, they're going to be restricted to a wheelchair. This girl here has 90% underdevelopment of her cerebellum, the size of a grape instead of a tangerine, and you can see her, she has clamps on her head and holding it up. Since she was born, and she's 11 years old here, since she was born, people have to wipe her bottom. Here she is, it's now 2 years later, after this picture was taken. She's now 13. She's 11 in this picture. She's going through puberty. Somebody's going to have to change her tampons, wipe her bottom, feed her, do everything for her, give her massages 3 or 4 times a day to prevent pressure ulcers, all this machinery that's needed to move her around. Care, extraordinary care. It's $5 million a year for that child. There's 10,000 babies born with this disease in America every year. Whose fault is that? OBGYN. Totally preventable. This is the part of the brain that's underdeveloped when you have the cerebellum, when you have cerebral palsy. Same way with belly button hernias. It's a gradient disease. Here's a pretty typical belly button hernia the size of a walnut. Just you give that baby a hypnotic either by injection or gas. Puts local anesthesia around that. 10 minutes, the procedure is done. You've repaired that belly button hernia, but the baby shouldn't have to go through that. Mama was missing something during pregnancy for that to happen. This next one, the baby was born dead of vascular shock because the defect went from the 2 inches below the belly button through the belly button to 2 inches above it, and there's no skin over it, and the stomach and the spleen and some of the intestines are hanging out, and you can see why didn't the OBGYN know that baby was suffering from vascular shock? Well, he was in the bathroom giving himself drugs. This one here, the defect goes from the pubic bone all the way to the middle of the chest, and here the liver and the stomach, the spleen, and all the intestines are hanging out. You can see how that baby would die from vascular shock being born that way. Where was the OBGYN? That baby's perfect. Brain is perfect, lungs are perfect, heart's perfect, liver's perfect, everything's perfect. It died from vascular shock because all its insides are hanging out during birth. That baby, if it was delivered by cesarean section, would be alive today. Somebody needs to go to jail here. Same with cleft palate. It's a gradient disease, different degrees of severity. Whether you're rich or poor, if the mother's deficient in zinc in the first 3 to 7 weeks of pregnancy, you can get cleft palate and many other defects. Kids are born deaf, congenital deafness. Doctors want you to believe it's genetic, and they're raising money. They have all these funds to raise money to prevent, change the genes, fix the genes. It's caused by deficiency of a single mineral called manganese, not magnesium, manganese. Deficiency in the first 3 to 7 weeks of pregnancy causes congenital deafness. This new book that pharmacist Ben talked about when he introduced me is called Epigenetics. Epigenetics tells you that the genetic theory of disease transmission is one of those dead theories. There is not a single disease that's transmitted genetically. The death of the genetic theory of disease transmission. The death of the genetic theory of disease transmission. There's thousands of dead theories, the medical trade, in the halls of science. And the epigenetics tells you that these diseases that are said to be genetic are preventable, and many of them reversible with nutritional supplementation prior to conception. A lot of diseases like Huntington's disease, which is a disease that kind of falls in between Parkinson's disease and MS, Lou Gehrig's disease, they're said to be genetic. It occurs in people 50 years of age and older. Come on. Okay, we'll get into that in a little bit. Totally preventable, reversible. The death of the genetic theory of disease transmission. That's me in 1977 with one of my cystic fibrosis monkeys. You've all heard of obesity. Of course, the medical theory and the government's theory of why America is obese and overweight is because we don't exercise enough, we eat too much. Well, following their theory to eat less and exercise more, we became the number one obese nation in the world. We're number one! The only thing we can brag about being number one in the health area is we're obese by following their theory. So obviously that theory didn't work. So what causes obesity? What causes people to be overweight if it's not lack of exercise and eating too much? Well, it's a simple nutritional deficiency. You take the nutrients and it goes away. We'll get into that in some detail if we have time. Multiple sclerosis, a disease that historically occurred primarily in people between the ages of 30 and 60. MS, today, in the last 10 years, the peak of the demographic curve of who gets MS are kids under the age of 12. They're even diagnosing MS now in 10-month-old babies. 10-month-old babies. How's that happening? Free radical damage to the myelin of the brain. Free radical damage to the myelin of the brain. Well, why is it now we're getting it in young babies, 10 months old, and it used to be in people 50 years old? That's because our babies are getting free radicals damaging their myelin of the brain. Well, where are they getting the free radicals? Apple juice. What happens when you cut an apple in half and leave it exposed to the air without putting lemon juice on it? It turns brown. What's turning brown in the apple? It's oxidation of the oil in the apple. Apple juice is not taken care of very well. It's one of the first non-formula things you give a baby is, an ounce of apple juice and 8 ounces of water in a little bottle. They're giggling, they're happy. But the free radicals that build up because of the apple juice oxidizing, the oil in the apple juice oxidizing, causes MS in little babies. Thrombotic stroke, again, used to be in people over the ages of 50, 60, 70. Now, the peak of the demographic curve are kids under the age of 18. How's that happening? Well, thrombotic stroke doesn't occur because of genetics. Thrombotic stroke doesn't occur just out of dumb luck. It's caused by an omega-3 essential fatty acid deficiency, a ratio problem between omega-3s, 6s, and 9s. That's another one of my lawsuits against the FDA. Because I prevailed in federal court, I can legally say that you can actually prevent thrombotic stroke. You can prevent pulmonary embolism. You can prevent coronary thrombosis and deep vein thrombosis simply by supplementing with omega-3 essential fatty acids and having a perfect ratio between omega-3, 6s, and 9s. Before I sued them and won in federal court, I couldn't say that without getting put in jail. How many of you give your kids and grandkids under the age of 5 1,000 milligrams of supplemental omega-3s every day? Gosh, I don't see any hands going up. That's why your kids are going to die before you from MS and stroke and stuff like that. Heart attacks, Keyshawn disease, cardiomyopathy, heart disease. So how come this is happening now? Why are they getting all these strokes? We didn't get strokes until we were in our 50s, 60s, 70s. That's because we were getting omega-3s when we were kids. Well, wait a minute, we didn't supplement. Well, yeah, you did. It was in egg yolks. Our kids now are living on Fruity Pebbles and apple juice, Sunny Delight and shredded wheat, Welch's grape juice and Cheerios. How many omega-3s are in them? Nothing, 0. You better be supplementing your kids and your grandkids before they're conceived all through the pregnancy or development from the moment they're born with all 90 essential nutrients, and you'll avoid all this stuff. Now, the most politically charged of all of the congenital events, birth defects, if you will, is another one of these gradient diseases like belly button hernias, cerebral palsy. It's totally 100% preventable, but once the baby is born, it's irreversible. Homosexuality in both males and female occurred in the first 3 to 7 weeks of pregnancy. There's a part of the brain called the preoptic hypothalamus that controls not your gender, but controls who you go after for sex. Your gender is determined genetically, but there's a piece of your brain that determines who you will go after for sex, a boy or a girl. And it can be different from your genetic sex. And that's what happens with homosexuality, asexuality, hermaphrodites, all that kind of stuff, because what goes on up here is different from your genetic sex. Now, intersex babies, ones that they're hermaphrodites, they have both male and female parts. The medical system in America, they will look for bar bodies, which is the second female hormone, chromosome, second female chromosome, called a bar body. And you can see that every nucleus of the white blood cell in a blood sample from a newborn baby that has a hermaphrodite has both the male and female parts. When they have the bar bodies, they're female genetically. And here's some real, this is a line drawing obviously, but here's bar bodies in some real XX female blood smears, and you can see in a male XY, there's nucleoli because it's getting ready to divide, but there's no bar bodies. Bar bodies are totally different than the nucleoli. And so when they find a baby that is a hermaphrodite, but they have bar bodies, they will surgically remove the penis and the testicles, do a little plastic surgery, and beat their chest and say, I did good for this baby. Well, 85% of the time when the baby's born hermaphrodite, up here, in their preoptic hypothalamus, they're male. 85% of the time they're male. And our pediatric surgeons and OBGYNs have done some of the most cruel things to these babies born hermaphrodites. While in Europe and Scandinavia, they wait till the babies are 10 years old, because by the time they're 10 years old, the babies know which one they are in their preoptic hypothalamus. They have both parts, and you ask the baby, they're 10 years old. Well, you got both parts there, Frank. I mean, it's obvious, you know that. But really, which one are you? Are you a girl or boy? So, well, I'm a boy. And so they cut off the vagina and the ovaries and do some plastic surgery and make them a boy, even though genetically it might be a female. It's the kindest thing to do it that way. One more, and then I'll show you the part of the brain that's afflicted, and then we'll get to the bottom line here. This fellow here, very famous eye surgeon in Central California. His name was Richard. And Richard fathered several cute kids, very famous for dealing with laser surgery to tack down detached retinas. He was very active in his church. He was very active in things like the Rotary Club, Rotary International, and the Lions Club, raising money for projects. But when his last child reached 18 years of age, he went from Central California to Denver, Colorado, had his penis and testicles amputated, had a vagina made, had breast implants, got hormone treatments, and went from Richard to Renee. Because since he was 10 years old, he knew up here that he was a she. Now, this is a part of the brain that's afflicted. This is not a part of the brain that's necessary for life. I mean, you cut this brain off here, you're going to die. You cut this part of the brain off, you're going to be a vegetable and just lay there like a worm. You cut this part of the brain off, you're going to be dead. But this little peninsula here, the preoptic hypothalamus, about the size of my little finger. If there's no cells in there, there's about 400 cells in there normally. If there's no cells in there, the individual is asexual. Everybody has a crazy Aunt Ruthie or crazy Uncle Frank who, the legend goes, they went on a date when they were 20 and their boyfriend or girlfriend jilted them. I don't know how you can jilt somebody after one date, but they said they jilted them and they never went out again because they were so wounded from being jilted after that one date, and they died never having gotten married. Well, they were asexual. They just really weren't interested in sex, but everybody else was going on dates, so they thought they'd try it once and so on. If there's a few more cells in there, say 25 to 50, they're bisexual. They love having orgasms, but they don't care if it's a male or female. You get a few more cells in there. It depends on what part of that preoptic hypothalamus is involved. Let's say you got 150 cells in there now, but they're in one place, which drives you to chase boys. But genetically, you're a male. You're being pulled by your preoptic hypothalamus to chase boys. Okay, you're a male homosexual. If you're a female, and it tells you to chase females, you're a lesbian. You have 250 cells to 400 cells, you're heterosexual. That's how it works. Totally preventable. However, after the baby's born, can't go back. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. Here's the bottom line, folks. All vertebrates, whether you're a hummingbird or a human being or an elephant, require 90 essential nutrients. How long do you need oxygen? For life. How long do you need water? For life. How long do you need the 90 essential nutrients? For life. There's 60 minerals, 16 vitamins, 12 essential amino acids, 3 essential fatty acids, and they're called essential for two reasons. Number one, we can't make them. We must consume them every day, either as food or supplements. And if they're missing, secondly, if they're missing for any length of time, you get horrible diseases, all of which are fatal. Plants only need 3 minerals to make good seeds for the next generation. We need 60. So if you're eating a pretty good slice of organically grown, multigrain bread, baked with love by the pastor's wife in the church on Sunday when he gives his very best sermon he's ever given his whole life, you're 57 minerals short. This article is from Food Chemistry, and Food Chemistry is a very well-respected scientific journal. It's very boring. It just tells you where they grow food and how many nutrients is in that food from that county or that plat of land, how many pollutants or what the pollutant load is. This particular issue, April 16, 2012, they did an article where they analyzed the nutritional value and the pollutant load in baby formulas, 8 classic baby formulas in America and Canada that everybody knows and respects, Gerber's, Enfamil, Similac, ones like that. And they said, commercially available baby foods may contain less than 20% of the recommended levels of minerals and vitamins. Dog food has 100%, laboratory rat food has 100%, chicken food has 100%, and your babies, grandbabies, and babies have less than 20%. Somebody needs to go to jail. That's why you must supplement. You cannot depend on, quote, eating well. You cannot depend on eating well. 60 years ago, we had perfected perfect dog food. We spent $100 billion perfecting dog food. What did we get for that? Well, we tripled their lifespan over 60 years. 60 years ago, an old dog was 8 years old, 10-year-old dog is 25. We eliminated 900 different diseases that still plague humans, including all birth defects you can name and 10 times that many you can't. We didn't do that with organ transplants. We didn't do that with genetically engineered protein, stem cells, or wonder drugs. We did it simply by putting vitamins and minerals in their dog food. This is the Weekend magazine from the Globe and Mail up in Canada. The Globe and Mail is their equivalent of the USA Today. This article was written by a medical doctor, and he was wanting you to eat real food and not take vitamin mineral tablets and pills and capsules. I do both. For breakfast, I'll have 4 poached eggs and a steak. I'll have a baked sweet potato with butter and cinnamon. I'll have all my supplements. For lunch, I have a couple of snacks. I have another light load of my supplements. At dinner time, I'll have some grilled salmon with a great salad. I'll have some dessert, and I will have my supplements. I eat very well. I have steak at least once a day. At least once a day. Better yet, 3 times a day, right? I avoid oil. I avoid burning my foods. I won't eat if it's burnt. I avoid gluten, no wheat, brown, rye, and oats. I take all my supplements. You see, if you eat well, how many milligrams of calcium are you going to get from that apple? You can't tell. How many micrograms of selenium are you going to get from a 1-inch wedge of that apple? You can't tell. How many international units of vitamin A or beta-carotene are you going to get from eating a slice of that tomato? You can't tell. So I'm going to eat well, but I'm going to also take my supplements because I know how many milligrams, how many units, how many micrograms of everything I'm getting, because I'm not going to leave my life from the life of my kids and grandkids and great-grandkids and great-great-grandkids up to chance, to the throw of the dice, what may or may not be in that food. I'm going to make sure everything is in there perfect. The equivalent of not supplementing would be to put a couple of shovels full of dirt from Texas in the crankcase of your car. Say, well, there's probably oil in there because that dirt's from Texas. That'd be really stupid, wouldn't it? Well, when you just eat well, and you don't supplement with everything you know properly to make sure you get everything you need, worse yet, if you don't supplement your kids and grandkids and great-grandkids. Rich people, thousands of years ago, royalties, wealthy noblemen, wealthy merchants, would get their minerals from mummy dust. You go to the grave robber who had already sold off all the jewelry and the clothes and trinkets that were buried with him, but he kept the mummy because there was more money in the mummy than there was in the trinkets. You go to everybody knew where the grave robbers were, just like back in the Prohibition days, everybody could get whiskey, even though it was illegal, right? And so you go to the grave robber and you say, look, I got arthritis in my right hip, and he'd go cut the right hip off the mummy, grind it up, give you the powder, and in 6 weeks' time your hip was cured. It would go away. The arthritis would go away. Why? Because human joints have chondroitin sulfate, glucosamine sulfate, hyaluronic acid, collagen, vitamin A, vitamin D, calcium, magnesium. It has all this stuff, and it would repair that joint. Now, human joints are a lot more expensive than chicken joints, right? And so slaves and subsistence farmers couldn't get their minerals in the same fashion, so where did they get their minerals? From wood ashes. Wood ashes are not really ashes. They're the plant minerals that are left when you burn away the wood. Powder that's left in the fireplace, the wood stove, is really plant minerals. You throw it in the garden, and the corn and the peas and the sweet potatoes and the onions and the tomatoes and peppers, whatever you're growing out there, suck up these minerals. You throw them in the garden, the plants suck them up, you eat the plants, you get your minerals in that fashion. Well, that was the way we supplemented with our minerals. That's the way, the traditional way we got minerals for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years, until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Monday, September 4th, 1882, on Pearl Street in New York City, on the bluff overlooking the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge, where this fellow here, Thomas Edison, pulled the switch on the first commercial electric generating plant. Within 10 years, every town and every municipality and every city in the industrialized world converted from wood as the universal fuel to electricity. How many wood ashes, how many plant minerals are left over when you fuel your home with electricity instead of wood? Zero. And what did you replace your traditional source of nutritional minerals with? Nothing. And here comes a well-respected individual, a doctor, saying, now, don't you supplement with vitamins and minerals. You can overdose, you know. You better be saving your money for pharmaceuticals. You're going to need it as you get older. This is a satellite picture from 100 miles up. Southern California agricultural land. This is Mexico down here, Yuma, Arizona over here, Pacific Ocean over here. This is the Salton Sea, so you know exactly where this is at in Southern California. The Salton Sea is a salt lake about 1/10 the size of the Great Salt Lake in Utah. But what you see here is the nutritional minerals do not occur in a uniform blanket around the crust of the earth. Nutritional minerals occur in veins like chocolate and chocolate rubble ice cream. These different colors and swirls and whirls are telling you these whirls and swirls are made up of different minerals, different mixtures of minerals, different amounts of each one. And the only way we can guarantee that every mouthful and every animal that eats soybeans, they're grown here, corn that's grown here, whatever might be grown here, we're going to put in their feed. We're going to give them, we're going to supplement them with everything we know they need for maximum life, no birth defects, going to maximum production of milk, meat, eggs. When you look at that label on the dog food, on the chicken food, on the dairy food, on beef cattle feed, that label reflects only what we put in there, not what the food got out of the soil. What the food got out of the soil is value added, but it's a throw of the dice. So we put everything we know they need for perfect everything, we put it in there. This is a compost pile that contains 77 minerals in it. These are plant-derived minerals. This is a compost pile. This is plants. There's 100 cubic miles of this stuff. There is a 10,000 year supply if everybody on the earth uses this stuff. These guys are standing on a road 3,000 foot elevation above sea level. This white cap is 25 foot thick marine limestone. We know it's marine limestone because the animal and plant fossils in the limestone are from the ocean. This has zero pollution. It was under the sea for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. The ultimate question is, do you put oil in your car before the engine burns up or after the engine burns up? You put oil in your car before the engine burns up. You change the oil over 3,000 miles, whatever the maintenance book says. You'll get 300,000 miles out of that engine. If you put water in that car instead of oil, that car might not go 50 miles. So you know to put the oil in the car. Well, Methuselah lived to be 969. Those in the Old Testament who begat so-and-so, who begat so-and-so, who begat so-and-so, they lived to be 150, 200, 300. So who knows how long we can live if we do everything right. So isn't it insane to supplement with everything we know we need in perfect amounts? Eat right, but make sure we're getting everything perfectly, like we do putting oil in cars before the engine burns up. Now myself, next month, using the Chinese method of aging, I'll be 75. Using the American aging system, I'll be 74. I have not been to a doctor with me being the patient for the last 68 years. I've never been on prescription medication. I have no health problems whatsoever, and nobody's going to steal an airplane with me on it. Now, if everybody were like me medically, The medical system would be real humble if their patients only came to them once every 75 years, wouldn't they? They'd be real humble. I've been taking the 90 essential nutrients twice a day since I was 9 years old. I've been taking this program twice a day since I was 9. Now, I'm not stupid enough to think that I, a 9-year-old kid, figured this out by myself. I figure I had some divine guidance there, right? And so I feel that I'm obligated to keep sharing this with people. If I had divine guidance, got rid of one of my health problems when I was 9, that was it. Never had a health problem again. It's all preventable. There's only 2 reasons why you won't get the result you're looking for. Only 2 reasons, maybe 3. Number 1, you're underdosing. A 200-pound person taking enough for a 50-pound kid ain't going to work, as they say in France. And then you can't absorb it. You're dosing perfectly, but you're only getting 10% because you can't absorb it. You are not what you eat. You are what you absorb. Thirdly, you're underdosing and you can't absorb. So 10% of nothing is not very much. The most common reason why people are not absorbing is gluten intolerance. People say, well, I'm gluten-free. I mean, I'm obsessive about it. I am gluten-free. You have a dog? Yep. You have dry dog food? Yep. You're not gluten-free. Because dry dog food is made from gluten. You have a cat? Yep. You give them dry cat food? Yep. Well, you're not gluten-free. Well, I can't get my spouse to give up gluten. Well, you're not gluten-free then. Everybody in the household, including the mother-in-law, the spouse, the dog, the cat, the bird, the fish, because of cross-contamination of the laundry, the couch where everybody watches TV, the food preparation service, the bed you sleep in, everybody in the household's got to be gluten-free. Otherwise, you're not gluten-free. And then, of course, you need stomach acid. You cannot be drinking alkaline water during meals because you neutralize your stomach acid. To absorb minerals, to digest proteins, to absorb B12, your stomach pH has got to be pH 1.2. It's got to be like battery acid. It also keeps your stomach sterile so you don't have yeast and bacteria growing there. You won't have reflux. It makes your reflux go away. So when people tell me they haven't gotten the results, you have to go back and do a little investigation, do a little housekeeping, figure out why you're not absorbing. Are you underdosing? Well, you have to look at all those things. Because this program I've been doing for 36 years will never fail. If it fails, it means you're not absorbing or you're underdosing or both. And thank you very much for being a good audience.